Archie, I keep hearing this concept of FIRE. What is that all about?
Well, I'll tell you, and let's get fired up. I'm Archie Hoxton.
And I'm Rob Hoxton.
And this is Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. Welcome back to the Last Paycheck podcast. We're your hosts, Archie Hoxton and Rob Hoxton. And today we have a topic for you that's very popular. If you've ever thought about retirement, especially if you're young, you've probably come across this term and this movement. And that's the FIRE movement, or Financial Independence Retire Early.
There's going to be a generational battle going on here for the next 15 minutes, I think, right? The old generation, I'm almost a baby boomer, not quite. And then your younger generation with their FIRE stuff.
Yeah, it tends to be really popular with millennials and the younger generations, and it's all about gaining financial independence so that you don't have to be tied to your desk as early as possible, right? And it involves extremes, discipline in what you spend money on, and how you spend your money, discipline in how you save and how much you save.
Let's talk about what it stands for, though. Doesn't FIRE stand for fully invested, raging into eternity?
Not that I know of.
Maybe I'm thinking of something else.
I think, that's something else. Financial independence, retire early.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's all about, like I said, it's about really aggressively saving and spending as little as possible in order to give yourself financial independence and retire early.
Retire early, but the vision of that retirement tends to be one that's pretty austere, right?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, and it's sort of the classic FIRE movement. It is a somewhat austere, kind of a minimalist approach where, in order to be able to retire in your 50s or 40s or even 30s, you've got to be able to keep a pretty tight grip on the spending.
Right. So the concept of FIRE was actually, I did a little research before we started talking about this, but it originates from a book, a 1992 book entitled Your Money or Your Life. It was written by Vicki Robin and Joe Dominguez. It's a popular book. I remember reading it a long time ago, but I forgot about the FIRE piece of it. And so giving credit where credit is due, I think we should do that. So
yeah, and if you go and you go out onto YouTube or somewhere on the internet, you can see stories of people who have successfully entered into retirement at an extraordinarily young age, and they've done it through whether it's side hustles, maybe they've got a really high-paying job, and mostly across the board, extreme frugality.
Very disciplined people with very minimal needs.
Right.
So maybe are they living in those little micro houses that you see? Or they've taken the school bus and converted that into a house? Or
seen stories like that. The van life is kind of a trendy thing right now. You see on social media people who buy a van and they live in the van and they travel around, and maybe they work remotely and they live that kind of lifestyle and they enjoy that and they like kind of being nomads. Or maybe that's sort of the end game. I'm going to hit 35. I'm going to have X amount saved up. I'm going to live really frugally out of my van and just travel and enjoy life.
Well, it seems like, at first blush at least, it seems like the primary objective of people who are trying to achieve this FIRE is that they simply just don't want to work. When in reality, I think it's they want to be able to have control over what their daily life looks like.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not that they're lazy or they don't want to work, because they work really hard
Yeah.
to save enough to be able to pull this off. When you're going to be retired for, say, 50 years, there's a tremendous amount of risk, and the things that can go wrong and derail that are many,
Right.
which we can talk about. But it is a super interesting concept. I happen to love the work that I do, so you're going to be stuck with me, Archie. I can't imagine not getting up and going to work, even though I've probably got enough through savings over my career to support myself without having to work this job anymore.
Right.
But I love doing it. So
I think you nailed it, because I really do think it is more about freedom than it is about not working, or driven by some sort of laziness. I think you can't be lazy if you want to achieve this kind of ambitious goal. You've got to be disciplined.
Well, that's what I love about this concept, though, is if you think about what is money, and money really is, it's like the gas that goes in the car that takes you on that journey. It's what makes, that's what makes all of the things, the freedom things possible. Is that you have accumulated enough money, you've controlled your lifestyle to a degree that you're not running up credit card debt and getting yourself in trouble.
Right. Yeah, and I think that, this is kind of more like, it's like a set of ideas that's sort of fundamental to these set of ideas, that money is more about freedom and about flexibility. And if you have enough of it, you've got enough gas. The idea is save up enough, have enough reserves so that you can fuel the rest of your life and not feel like you've got to be doing, spending the majority of your time doing things just for the sake of earning money. And so, but there are multiple interpretations of this lifestyle, right? So, for example, we've talked a lot about what's called lean FIRE, which is what it sounds like. You're living really lean. You're keeping your expenses really low. You're living a very austere, minimalist lifestyle in order to make it work.
There will be no golf. There will be no dogs. And there will be no children.
Right.
What kind of a life is that?
Yeah. Right. Well, the other one that you hear talked about is fat FIRE, where you're sort of living high on the hog.
Ooh, that sounds doable to me.
Yeah. Now, the thing about this one that I find, difficult to wrap my mind around is that it almost seems just sort of unattainable unless you're starting with a huge advantage. Maybe you've inherited money. Maybe you have a really high-paying job. Maybe you had a successful business and you sold it. These are the kinds of folks who have enough so that they can live a lavish lifestyle without really having to generate income.
It sounds just like early retirement to me.
Right. It's early retirement, and it's that, you've got plenty of money in investments, and so it almost is, it's almost, in my mind, a different category, and isn't really the kind of thing we think about when we think of FIRE, the FIRE movement.
The third type of FIRE is one that seems a lot more within reach for most people. What is that?
It's called the Barista FIRE.
I love that.
And I think I don't know where it got that name. I think it probably came from the idea, well, you retire early, but you still keep a job as a barista. And you work part-time.
In my generation, that was called being a Walmart greeter.
Yeah.
Right? But now, everybody's upgraded a little bit. Now it's working as a barista at Starbucks, maybe.
Right. Yeah, and so that, but and it doesn't have to be, of course, you could be a Walmart greeter. You could, any kind of part-time work. You could do the kind of work you do now and just scale back your hours. It's really about including some work to supplement the savings that you have in order to retire early. That makes it more realistic. You might not have to save quite as much.
We actually have quite a few clients who have kind of embraced that, the Barista FIRE. They took early retirement packages when their employers were downsizing, and they're doing a whole host of things. I've got clients who are driving for Grubhub.
Yeah.
They just needed an extra $500 a month, and they do that. And it's interesting. They travel all over the country, and they can just, wherever they find themselves, can drive for Grubhub.
Yeah.
Get the money they need in order to move on to the next location where they're exploring and hiking and doing all of these exciting things. So I think it's really important. What's really important about this is that there's a reimagining of what life after work looks like,
right,
or retirement looks like, which is really cool, and that's what this podcast is really about.
Yeah, and that's why FIRE is such a fitting topic for this, because it is a radical reimagining of retirement, and can be interpreted many ways.
Archie, what are some of the potential pitfalls? I know one of the big things they talk about is the safe withdrawal rate, concept of a 4% safe withdrawal rate. What are some of the issues?
Yeah, so that's, there's a couple rules of thumb that tend to guide the FIRE movement. One of them that I've heard is 30 times your annual savings, or excuse me, annual expenses is what you should have saved.
In a nest egg.
In a nest egg.
Portfolio.
Right, that's sort of a rule of thumb. Another one is using the 4% safe withdrawal rate. Now, the safe withdrawal rate is something that came out of a study done in 1994 based on what withdrawal rate is sustainable in the majority of, historical market outcomes for a 30-year retirement.
And that's with monies that are invested in, in some sort of a balanced strategy. Okay.
So they came out with, based on our tests, 4% withdrawal rate is sustainable over that period of time. And it sort of just became this rule of thumb that people talk about all the time. And rules of thumb are useful, but they're rules of thumb. They're not specific to your situation. So I'm always, hey, be careful about using a rule of thumb to build, your financial plan around, to make huge life decisions around. Because, right, that's one of the main things. If you're going to be retiring early, your time horizon in retirement may well be longer than 30 years. And so that's more time for things to go wrong, more time for bear markets, more time for inflation, more time for recessions, more time for those things to all converge at once.
Which happens from time to time, and actually more frequently than you might imagine. And there are radio personalities, a famous one whose name I won't mention, who's always talked about this safe withdrawal rate, and his only investment strategy is to find a growth mutual fund, put all your money in that, and because it has an average return of the markets of 10% or something, then of course you can take 4% out. Well, yeah, it's a difference between having an average return of 10% and then looking at the sequence of those returns and the timing of the returns. The situation is a lot more complicated than really any rule of thumb like a 4% can really address.
Right.
So the devil is in the details there. There's no hard and fast rule that works in all circumstances.
Yeah. And this is why if you're going to be going after this FIRE lifestyle choice, it's important to, one, either bring a financial planner into your life or get ready to be your own financial planner, because there's no accidentally stumbling into a successful early retirement. Some people sort of accidentally stumble into, a successful traditional retirement because they've been chunking away money in their 401k for 40 or 50 years even.
Yeah, they're old enough so that they're going to qualify for Medicare,
Social Security.
They've got all of these social safety nets that can help them along. If you retire at 35, you don't get any of that.
Right.
So you gotta answer those questions. How am I going to handle health insurance? Is my portfolio going to generate enough to cover my expenses, and my expenses on an inflation adjusted basis? I mean, you got to be able to spend more next year than you're spending this year because things are more expensive next year than they are.
Right.
What about if you have health problems later in life and you need long-term care? I I mean, are you going to have the resources for that? So these are all things that you have to plan for, right?
Absolutely. And that's why, again, you really got to bone up or work with someone whose livelihood is helping people with this sort of thing. Because like you said, you won't have the traditional benefits, right? You have penalties to withdraw from your 401k. You don't have Medicare, right? You don't have Social Security.
When you do get Social Security, because you haven't been paying into it as long, your benefit's going to be smaller as well. Another thing to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that's a short version of this as far as things to consider and important, pitfalls that you may run into. Keep those things in mind. A lot can happen over 40 or 50 years. So go in with a really good plan. And remember when you stop, we talked about this before, when you stop working, it can be very easy to suddenly have a gap in, for lack of a better term, meaningfulness in your life, whether that's connections with people at work, whether it's having something that you do every day that gives you a sense of drive and purpose. That's something to have planned out too.
Ask yourself, is it just that you don't like what you're doing for a living and that you want to retire early to get away from that? Or because you can change that. You can save and get yourself in a good financial position and then find the thing that you're passionate about, that you love, and maybe you do it for less money.
Right. Yeah. And remember, tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So remember, to strike that balance between enjoying life now and preparing to enjoy life in the future. I think that's important, that it'd be easy to live so frugally now that you don't, you sacrifice some of the basic enjoyments and pleasures of life. And then, we don't even know if you make it to retirement. So keep that in mind as well. You see that with people who practice this, sometimes discuss that as one of the issues. So we hope that this at least gives you some stuff to think about, maybe a start if you want to head down the path of the FIRE lifestyle. But if you have any questions, leave us a comment. Please like and subscribe and share with your family and friends. And we'll see you next time. You've been watching Last Paycheck, weekly wisdom to help you retire and stay that way. If you like this show, be sure to hit like and subscribe. Last Paycheck is available anywhere you get your podcasts.